Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist and CIA operative, is portrayed as the driving force behind MK Ultra, a top-secret program launched in the 1950s. And I'll say that he kind of was a driving force, but at the end of the book, it also says that he was just like a scapegoat. You know, he was like the patsy, like the fall guy. After all of this stuff, they just needed one guy to pin it on, you know, like one guy to be the bad guy. He was. So, it's kind of interesting. There's probably a lot more people involved. And as well, he had disabilities. So, like, again, it's anytime somebody has disabilities, it's easy to pin stuff on them. Despite his physical disabilities, a clubfoot and a stutter, Gottlieb rose to prominence within the CIA due to his expertise in chemistry and willingness to push ethical boundaries. The origins of MK Ultra. MK Ultra was born out of Cold War paranoia, particularly fears the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea were developing advanced mind control techniques. The program aimed to find ways to manipulate human behavior, extract information from prisoners, and create programmable assassins. And like it goes into this and into the book, it actually says it repetitively over and over that the CIA fabricated all of the evidence it needed to do all of this stuff. So, like, there was no evidence that the Soviet Union, China, or North Korea were doing any of this stuff. But the CIA fabricated and manufactured the evidence required for them to do this operation. So that they could go around and tell everybody, oh yeah, they're coming for you, they're coming for you. And that actually involved releasing the famous book, The Manchurian Candidate, which made the movie. And it's hilarious because in the book, they talk about how in the movie, in the book, they purposely put in a method that didn't work. What is it? They put in the suggestion, like a suggestive power, was like how the mind control worked in the movie. But in real life, they found that that's not how it worked. So the CIA made this book and movie about mind control and put it out to justify their programs, but the method of mind control in the movie was totally made up and not real, which made the public's perception of mind control even further from reality, which was beneficial for them. For people to have no concept of what real mind control would be like. They just see this movie, this like Hollywood version of it, even though that doesn't really exist. So the program aimed to find ways to manipulate human behavior, extract information from prisoners, and create programmable assassins, which MK Ultra was never able to do. They were never able to do a programmable assassin. They were able to destroy people's minds, but they were never able to create people's minds, which is pretty fascinating. Experiments and ethical violations. Kinzer details the horrifying experiments conducted under MK Ultra, including the administration of LSD and other psychoactive drugs to unwitting subjects, often without their consent. Again, this all started with the Nazis. The Nazis were the ones that began all of this. I'm pretty sure it says this a little bit later on. Experiments were conducted on a wide range of individuals, including prisoners, mental patients, CIA employees, and even ordinary citizens. The book highlights cases of severe psychological trauma, addiction, and death resulting from these experiments. So one of the key ones was we had U.S. Army soldiers who had gone to war in Korea, and I think they might have been Air Force. I can't remember if there was Army or Air Force, but they were using biological weapons on Korea, and they had a crisis of conscience during their operation, and they surrendered themselves to the North Koreans, maybe they were captured, I can't remember, but some of them escaped, some of the Americans escaped, and some of the Americans decided to stay. They were mainly black soldiers. That's a lot of the people that were fighting. We basically only send poor people to war. Like, we very rarely send rich people to war. My family was some of them that were too poor to pay their way out of the draft, so they had to go, even though they were old. They couldn't. They were poor and old, so they couldn't get out of the war like rich young people can. So the people that were able to escape, the Americans that were able to escape, when they got back, they got put into these torture programs because the Americans just couldn't conceive of the fact that, like, a poor black soldier dropping biological weapons on another country would have a crisis of conscience and not want to come back to America in the middle of Jim Crow. You know? It's kind of hilarious. The civil rights movement. I mean, it's not hilarious, it's sad, but it's hilarious that they couldn't figure out that, you know, these people weren't being brainwashed. They were just upset. But collaboration with questionable figures. Gottlieb and the CIA collaborated with Nazi scientists, former concentration camp doctors, and other morally dubious figures to advance their research. These collaborations raised significant ethical questions as the CIA sought to leverage the expertise of individuals with horrific pasts. I'm sure a lot of people have read the book Blitzed, or the author's the other stuff, his other books. I can't think of the other ones. He's written a couple books about Nazis and their drug use, and he got close in a couple points of talking about how the Nazis were using these drugs, but he didn't go all the way. That's my thing with the author of Blitzed, because this is a very famous book that I'm talking about. Like, most people that have looked into this topic have read Blitzed, or at least know of it, if not multiple of his books. And I've even talked to that author before. And he just doesn't get the full picture of the full scope of what the Nazis were using these drugs for, and the full scope of their torture programs. So yeah, I just had to note that this book is much less apologetic than the Blitzed ones. Again, he's almost like, I don't want to like talk down on the guy, but I mean, he is German. A lot of German authors do take a sympathetic view of the Germans, trying to not make them as bad, and he definitely has a pro-Western analysis in Blitzed and all throughout his series. So he has like a pro-Western, pro-CIA, I hesitate to say pro-Nazi, but relatively, compared to other people, it is. Like, compared to the author of the book that we're analyzing right now, I would say that this author is much more critical of the Nazis and the American integration of the Nazis than Blitzed was. Let me say it that way. Which I would prefer the more critical version of it, because I find this to be much more heinous than I don't. There should be no justification of this. Like, these things are too far to be justified. So, especially when we're starting to get into MK Ultra and stuff like that. Like, how could you? You have to be the most sick, sadistic, psychopathic, sociopathic, terrible bastard in the world to ever try to say that MK Ultra was justifiable, or the things that they did in there was justifiable. That's why they had to destroy it all. It was a miracle we got any of this stuff out. Now, as far as MK Ultra, they tried to destroy all of it. Sidney Gottlieb ordered to destroy it. I'm pretty sure he tried to destroy it himself, and only some of it just happened to be found miraculously. Now, that's a miracle. We talked about what is a miracle and what's not a miracle earlier. Having documents that they tried to all destroy somehow surviving, and us finding the truth about this torture program, that's a miracle. That's God. Not having rich people take over Germany after World War II. Rich Nazis. So, we'll move on. Collaboration raised significant ethical questions as the CIA sought to leverage the expertise of individuals with horrific pasts, global reach, and covert operations. MK Ultra's activities extend beyond the United States, with experiments and operations conducted in Canada, Europe, and Asia. I don't know why it doesn't mention South America. The book also explores CIA used mind control techniques in real-world operations, including attempts to assassinate foreign leaders like Fidel Castro with poisoned cigars and other bizarre methods, as well as the successful assassination of African leaders at the order of, I believe it was JFK. The downfall of MK Ultra, it might have been Eisenhower actually, sorry. Can't remember. But downfall of MK Ultra, by the 1970s, MK Ultra began to unravel as investigative journalists and congressional inquiries exposed the program's activities. Many records were deliberately destroyed by the CIA, making it difficult to fully understand the scope of the program because they knew it was illegal and unethical. Sidney Gottlieb retired from the CIA and lived a relatively quiet life, never facing legal consequences for his actions. Though he was called multiple times to testify, I don't think he ever actually was charged with anything. They got close, though. Legacy and implications. Kinzer argues that MK Ultra represents a dark chapter in American history. Yeah, duh, obviously. Highlighting the dangers of unchecked government power and ethical compromises made in the name of national security. The book raises important questions about the balance between national security, morality, and long-term consequences of state-sponsored violence and experimentation. So I'll just say that, like, all of the psychic type testing and like a lot of the stuff with ufology, this torture program is the nexus point. It's the central nexus point to understanding so much stuff like consciousness. We were talking about the Schumann resonance at the beginning of the series of the podcast, and that was a Nazi experimenting with how to measure and quantify consciousness. And then he went to Wright Pat and worked with the CIA on consciousness and alternative energies and alternative propulsions. And that's just one guy. So we're talking about some very, very powerful stuff here. Like the fabric of everything that we can conceive of is like being manipulated by these people. Poisoner in Chief is a chilling and meticulously researched expose of one of the most secretive and unethical programs in U.S. history. Through the lenses of Sidney Gottlieb's life and career, Kinzer sheds light on the CIA's relentless pursuit of mind control and its willingness to sacrifice human lives in the process. The book serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing intelligence agencies to operate without oversight or accountability, and it challenges readers to confront the ethical dilemmas posed by the use of science and technology for covert purposes. I really liked the emphasis on the ethical dilemmas, and it was more than Annie Jacobsen's stuff, like I had said before. Kinzer's work is both a historical account and a moral critique, offering a sobering reminder of the lengths to which governments may go in the name of security and the human cost of such actions. This is Alan Dulles, I believe. One of the Dulles brothers. So we're moving on to the last book. Give a synopsis of The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, The CIA and the Rise of America's Secret Government. The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, The CIA and the Rise of America's Secret Government is a 2015 book by journalist historian David Talbot. It provides a critical and investigative account of Alan Dulles, the longest-serving director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and his role in shaping the CIA into a powerful, secretive, and often unaccountable force within the U.S. government. It also talks about the Nazi banking lineage very explicitly, as well as the Nazi CIA human trafficking with the State Department and what they had called rat lines, rat lines are these networks of channels that they traffic humans through globally. And some of those are, Nazis or slaves or organ trafficking, that sort of stuff. And it's kind of hinting back to, again, Kenneth Arnold and the Nazis and missing people episode again. And it seems like they really set up shop in South America and Argentina, maybe even Antarctica. That's a lot of people don't. It's fascinating, and a lot of people will love to hear about it. But when you start actually talking about it, we need more evidence of what's actually going on in Antarctica, and that's actually the fascinating part, is how difficult it is to get evidence down there, and the fact that it's supposed to be demilitarized, and if you try to go down there, you get intercepted by the Coast Guard. So like the military's like cutting it off, and I'm a pretty firm believer in not only that Kenneth Arnold saw at least something, but the fact that Admiral Byrd also had seen something. One of the highest decorated people that we had, like an explorer general guy that we sent down there with a big fleet to Antarctica, and he said that he got their asses kicked by basically craft coming out of the water that were the Nazis, and that they had advanced technology. I think his exact words were craft that can fly from pole to pole, something like that, like with the speed or something. And he said that he got pulled into, like an underground area while flying over Antarctica, and that the Nazis just like showed him around and then like let him go and told him to go and tell everybody. He came back to Congress. They filmed his testimony, classified the testimony, then put him in a mental institution, like an asylum, and he was never able to talk again. But he stopped at 2 ports on the way back to America, and that's where he gave his newspaper like briefing, saying that like all this crazy stuff happened down there. And it's really bad news if that's true. And I unfortunately do believe that is something that did occur. I feel like we have some other kind of instances of that sort of stuff in the past, so we'll just move on. But the book also explores the broader implication of Dulles' actions, including the rise of a secret government that operates beyond democratic oversight. The book portrays Allen Dulles as a central figure in creation and expansion of the CIA, transforming it into covert operations powerhouse during the Cold War. Dulles, a Wall Street lawyer with deep ties to corporate elite, is depicted as a man driven by a belief in American supremacy and willingness to use any means necessary to achieve geopolitical goals. The rise of the national security state. Talbot argues that Dulles and his allies helped establish a national security state. In the aftermath of World War II, where intelligence agencies and military interests gained unprecedented power, the shift often sidelined democratic processes with decisions about war, regime change, and covert operations made in secret by unelected officials. Covert operations and regime change. The book details numerous CIA-led covert operations under Dulles' leadership, including the 1953 coup in Iran, Operation Ajax, that overthrew Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, and the 1954 coup in Guatemala that ousted President Jacobo Arbenz, I guess. These operations, often justified as necessary to combat communism, had long-lasting negative consequences for the affected countries and undermined U.S. moral authority. The CIA, and organized crime. Talbot explores the CIA's collaboration with organized crime figures, particularly during the Bay of Pigs invasion and efforts to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro. The alliances blurred the lines between intelligence work and criminal activity, raising ethical and legal questions. So basically, he's saying here that the CIA and organized crime, basically since the beginning, have been working together. And I would call the Nazis also organized crime, but this is like a totally different, like the cartels and mafia and stuff, is what they were working together. So the mafia was not a fan of a lot of the things going on with the Cuban Revolution, because the Cuban communist government at that time, they didn't appreciate having mafia-owned casinos in Havana. And the CIA did appreciate that. So you can see where a power struggle would occur. The Kennedy assassination. One of the most controversial aspects of the book is its exploration of Dulles' potential involvement in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Talbot suggests that Kennedy attempted to rein in the CIA, and his resistance to Dulles' aggressive Cold War tactics may have made him a target. The book critiques the Warren Commission's investigation and implies that Dulles and the CIA may have played a role in covering up the truth. I think he was on the Warren investigation, which is insane. Like, JFK fired him. Like, spoiler, JFK fired him, and then Dulles was still, like, inside of CIA facilities working with Bush Sr. The day that JFK was assassinated. Quite the coincidence. The title, The Devil's Chessboard, refers to the idea that Dulles and his allies operated as puppet masters, manipulating global events from behind the scenes. Talbot argues that the secret government continues to influence U.S. policy, often prioritizing corporate and military interests over democratic principles. Say it louder, brother. That's like the most important part right there. Let me put that in bold. So important. Critique of American imperialism. This is also extremely important. Bold that too and save it. The book is highly critical of the U.S.'s government's role of covert operations and its embrace of imperialistic policies during the Cold War. Talbot argues that these actions are often justified in the name of national security, have had devastating consequences for global stability and democracy. See, this is like extremely important. This part right here is probably like the most important part, in my opinion. Like, other than the specifics and details and stuff like that, like ideologically, this is like big picture stuff. This is so important to understand. Conclusion. The Devil's Chessboard is a provocative and meticulously researched work that challenges the conventional narrative of the CIA's role in American history. It paints a damning portrait of Allen Dulles as a powerful, unaccountable figure who helped establish a culture of secrecy and impunity within the United States government. Basically, a rogue Nazi asshole. Talbot's book raises important questions about the balance of power and democracy and dangers of allowing intelligence agency to operate without transparency or oversight. So this guy was like the person directly in charge of connecting all of the fibers of Nazi society to American society. While some critics have questioned Talbot's speculative claims regarding the Kennedy assassination, the book remains a compelling and thought-provoking exploration of the hidden forces that have shaped modern American history. So, we're going to talk more about the U.S. torture program a little bit, and like kind of going back to the Nazis and the Schumann resonance, and that he was studying the brain and all this different stuff with ADHD. And today, we have Gary Nolan and other people that are scientists today that are studying this sort of stuff with UFO encounters. Let me read this particular part here. It says that, this is Gary Nolan, his involvement with the UAP began after he was asked to use blood analysis instrumentation to help with cases of pilots who were close to alleged UAPs and horrible brain damage. And the horrible is in parentheses, quotes. When asked if he could describe the more abnormal effects on the brains observed with the MRIs, Nolan said, "If you've ever looked at an MRI of somebody with multiple sclerosis, there's something called white matter disease. It's scarring. It's a big white blob or multiple white blobs scattered throughout the MRI. It's essentially dead tissue where the immune system has attacked the brain. That's probably the closest thing you could come to if you wanted to look at a snapshot from one of these individuals. You can pretty quickly see that something is wrong. Approximately 100 patients, mostly defense or government personnel working within the aerospace industry, were analyzed." And, sorry, I probably should have said, this is from 2021. A look inside people's brains who say they've had an UFO encounter, from Stanford Medicine, Dr. Gary Nolan. And he starts off by saying that they thought it was damage. Dr. Kit Green studied some of the people from what Nolan called a smorgasbord of patients. You have a smorgasbord of patients, some of whom had heard weird noises buzzing in their head, got sick, etc. A reasonable subset of them had claimed to have even seen UAPs and claimed to have been close to things that got them sick. I don't know how they know that. I don't know. Ultimately, his team learned the people who they originally thought were damaged had an overconnection of neurons between the head and caudate and the putamen, which are brain organs. The number of people that had this overconnection led to the open question: did coming in contact with whatever it was cause it or not? Kind of like a chicken and the egg question. Was the brain this way and that's what caused the interaction, or did the interaction cause the brain to be that way? Nolan said that approximately a quarter of the MRA patients who claimed they had an encounter died from their injuries. That's disturbing. And we don't know what a UAP is, or like what factions of UAP there are. So like, if there's like, it's hard not to laugh or like giggle. This sounds so crazy to say, but it's also so terrible that I can't laugh during it. But if we have like psychic CIA children or beings in UAPs that are like being tortured and used as tools, they might not be super friendly. So if they encounter somebody, you might not want to encounter some of these things, even if they're ours. If they're really piloted by these terribly treated psychic beings. It's very bizarre. But I have a feeling that 2025 is going to be the year that, a lot of this stuff comes to public. The truth is stranger than fiction. To say that we had a hybridization program, or CIA had a hybrid program, would be nuts. But now, there's tons of, it's easily documentable that there's tons of hybridization programs going on all over the world. Japan has one of the most longest standing ones. So this stuff is going on, and as far as genetically modifying children and stuff, if these are really based off of brain organs, it seems to reason that they could genetically modify beings. I don't know if I should call them children. I feel bad I feel bad not calling them children. I feel bad calling them children because I don't know what they are. Mostly human, so I guess we could call them children. They deserve to be loved. But the fact that they're treating them so badly, and it's just very disturbing. So, meanwhile, a jaw-dropping NASA report says the organization is not closed to the possibility of extraterrestrial life existing. They hadn't found any credible evidence of it, which, they would even tell us. So I guess that's all that it says on this one. I'm going to move on to a little bit of an NHI article, National Institute of Mental Health, which I'm pretty sure just got its funding cut. It might not even be an organization anymore. So I'm glad that we can still access this site while Trump and Musk just attack every single element of society and government. Luckily, this one's still up. So it says, NIH researchers identify brain connections associated with ADHD in youth. Large study finds atypical interaction between frontal cortex and processing centers deep in the brain. And